And welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And today, joining me today is Georgina Rose from Dot Darling, and it's one of my go-tos. I love watching your content. It's very informative. It's very scholarly approach, but also you're the kind of the real deal. Like you're doing this. You're not just someone teaching a course on this. This is your lifestyle. This is what you're into. You're the real deal. So that's why I really like to get your perspective on this stuff, because I'm going straight to the source. I'm not getting someone's opinion. This is the real, absolute truth about these topics. And so go and subscribe. Links in the description. You don't even have to go to the description. It's in the title. So you can just click on that blue link, subscribe. And there we go. So we're going to talk about paganism and magic, which is some topics that I like to get into in this channel very often. But I want to talk about it from a modern perspective. Like, what is happening in 2023 in the world of magic and paganism? And so, that's kind of a broad question topic, but you can take that and go wherever you want with it.
Yeah. Hello. I'm Georgina Rose. I'm the Dot Darling person. I have a channel, I have a podcast, and I talk about occult topics. I sort of explain how to get into them. I'm an active practitioner. I've been practicing this stuff as of February, it will have been a third of my life.
Oh,
so
wow.
that's, I know I have the big like annual anniversary every year in February, which is exciting.
Congrats.
And in terms of magic and paganism in 2023, it's pretty lively. Like, there's an active community. What's been interesting is over the past decade or so, as I've sort of seen the community grow and change and evolve, there's been this sort of movement away from these traditions that were really commonly practiced. Because, of course, if you got into the occult 10, 15, 20 years ago, obviously I was not into this 20 years ago, but I know many people who I'm friends with and who I spend a lot of time with who have been involved with this stuff since the 70s and stuff. And before then, you had to basically initiate into a tradition locally and find a group to teach you these things. Right. Because resources really scant. You could go to that, that weird shelf in Barnes & Noble that they call Mind, Body, Spirit. We all know that's the occult section, right?
Yeah.
Look, you find a metaphysical bookstore and look for the back shelves where they have the actual interesting stuff and not just the tumbled crystals, right?
Yeah, the Manly P. Hall books.
The internet is so big that you can find a lot of resources on these more niche traditions, these lost traditions. And so people are getting into really niche and older sort of dead forms of occultism. And so the community is really expanding out. And it's been interesting to watch. There've been a lot of new patterns that have emerged. And I found it really interesting because while a lot of what I've done is based in one of those traditions that were sort of, easily accessible, prior to the internet. I spent a lot of time with Thelema, which if you know about Thelema, there are lodges for Thelema all over the country. You can initiate in. They're international actually, but it is lovely seeing all these sort of new stuff emerge and pop up. And as a practitioner, I've been able to encounter certain rites and spirits and deities that have really sort of, shifted my practice in a really positive way. So I think it's going in an interesting direction. There's definitely the big shift that practitioners talk about is the move away from orders and groups that's happened. A lot of people are doing this stuff solitarily rather than in a established community with other people.
Sure.
And are sort of turning to the internet for their communities.
Right.
But it's definitely thriving. I know that there's a group in Greece that recently built an actual Greek pagan temple. Greek City Times has been doing updates on it. If you're aware of that newspaper, they've been doing a lot of updates on it.
Wow.
So it's been a pretty exciting time. The past few years in particular have had a lot of interest surging. It started to die down a little bit over the past year, but in general, it's a good time to be a Pagan, and it's a good time to be someone who's into magic.
Yeah, I've always talked about on my channel how because I do a lot of stuff that's critical of Christianity on my channel.
Yeah.
Half of my channel is digging into the lore, talking about the ancient Eleusinian mysteries or the Oracle of Delphi. I love reading about that stuff and talking about that stuff. But the other half of my channel is look at half we have this, you know, we had this evangelical Baptist power that, and like most people, their choices in religion, and they don't know, like obviously there's choices in paganism, like you just mentioned, but a lot of people don't know that. A lot of people think it's just become a Catholic or a Protestant. Now, to the point of why I'm bringing this up is, I would like to see before I die, people be able to decide between Catholic or Protestant or the Temple of Bacchus or the Temple of Athena, or I would like to see that happen and there be more options of people for religious outlets rather than just the here, go to your local Catholic church or go to your local, you know, evangelical church or Mormon. That's what I would like to see happening in the future.
Oh,
So, and
I
it's a lot of private stuff, like you mentioned, but I would like to. I think if it was more out in front, I think there. I just think it would sort of eat at the established religions a little bit, which I would promote that. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's becoming a lot more open than it was. I know like people who are starting these pagan groups locally because they've been in the US for a really long time. A lot of these groups have been around for decades. Particularly, some of the Thelemic groups have been in the US since like the 1930s, 1920s. And a lot of the Wiccan groups have been around since the 1950s. But the thing is, people who were in these groups, they kept it very private because, you know, they were worried about various pushbacks or whatever. Or I mean, they were small in numbers, so they weren't like everywhere. Even now, like a lot of these buildings that these like pagan groups like meet in, they're like the back of a metaphysical shop, like there'll be like a back room or something like that. But I do think people are starting to get more open about it. I've noticed that there are a lot more of these like new age metaphysical stores popping up. And I think that funnily enough, the rise of like new age spiritualism, which I don't like new age spiritualism. I think it's really toxic in a lot of ways and it drives me crazy. The only good thing that I will say has come from that is that being a pagan is something people are more aware of. Like if I say, yeah, I'm a pagan, I'm a perennialist, I'm a Thelemite, people won't really know what that means, but they'll have like a vague reference point. And I'm like, you know, sure, kind of. If I don't want to get into it, I'm sometimes like, okay, yeah, fine.
Yeah. Um. And you just actually let me. I just thought of a good question to ask you, because if this sort of pagan revival movement happened 100 years ago, we might see people getting put to death over this kind of stuff. Like there could be serious charges. If I'm not mistaken, probably was illegal. Maybe not illegal because we do have our constitutional rights. But like I feel like if this was 100 years ago, I feel like somebody in power who's, you know, got the Catholic Church or Protestant church behind them, they would probably find a way to like witch trials, like you had those going on. What do you think about that as far as like today? Is there any pushback on it?
Um, I mean, like people mostly just think I'm weird. Like that's my big pushback I get. People just think I'm strange, which I'm okay with.
Yeah,
That's
that's
fine with me.
whatever.
I'm not gonna lose my mind about that. But on your point, 100 years ago, the actual first occult revival was in the UK mostly, and it was in the late Victorian, early Edwardian period. A lot of these big occult groups that sort of brought on what we have now and modern paganism really comes out of these groups that were around in that time, and there were ones that came to the US. They were just less open about it and you had to kind of know where you were looking. You had Theosophy, the Theosophical Society, you had the Golden Dawn, you had these sort of offshoots of Freemasonry, not proper Freemason, but these kind of groups that broke
Right.
off. Fraternitas Saturni, like a lot of these groups were being established that far back. They just were not as easy to find, but they were there. There's
Yeah.
a really interesting book that you might like, The Myth of Disenchantment. It kind of gets into some of the occult revival. It focuses a lot on like mainstream religion, but it does touch a bit on like this stuff. So it's been around. There also was in the US the spiritualism movement, which were these people who did like seances, which I don't relate to that, but that was a thing in like early US.
Wow.
But it was always a little more subtle. I think if you were running around like saying I'm a witch like in public, maybe that wouldn't go so well for you. But
Yeah,
we've always sort of been there. We've just always not
that's a good
been
point.
as visible as we are now.
Now that you mentioned it like that, I think that's a good point. Let me try to think of what else. So, how is how is the community as far as togetherness? Is it very, there's a group over here? Is there like a central point to these, or is this just all individual grassroots movements happening on private on their own?
So I like to describe it in two ways. So there's what I would say the big tent community, right? We are all esoteric, right? We're all pagan. Pagan gets used as an umbrella term, even though pagan does have a specific definition. But there's the big broad tent, right? You got your Rosicrucians, you got your Gnostics, you got your Thelemites, you've got your pagans, and all the flavors of paganism, your Alsatrue people, your Celtic pagans, your Irish pagans, all of them. That's the big tent community. And we'll have like specific, I would say, like events where we'll all show up. Or there'll be like big conversations between all of us. We share a lot of the publications, like a lot of the presses, they publish all our stuff. Pathos is the big pagan like news site. All of us kind of write for that. But the thing is, in terms of actual, like, if you want to start practicing and like going to things and events, like, and practicing with a group and initiating and being taught by someone, that's when it gets sectarian and gets more specific. But even then, within these groups, there are always variation amongst the people in it, more so than I think you would see in a regular church. Because a lot of people, when it comes to picking a group, if they decide to go the group route or the teacher route or finding a mentor, they pick whatever is sort of closest to what they do, and they kind of just go with that. I find a lot. Like, I'll see like people who call themselves like Roman pagans and Greek pagans. If there's only a Greek pagan group, they'll join the same group, right? Stuff like that happens a lot. Or I've noticed some of the like Druid people will join like heathenry Alsatrue groups, because that's like, they're like, this is closest to what I can find.
Right. Yeah.
But there definitely are like subcategories. So it depends on how you're approaching it, I would say. Kind of yes to both of your like ways of explaining it.
Well, that's not that different than the ancient world, because the ancient world, like Roman religion, after a certain point, sort of just adopted what the Greeks were doing. And even in the Augustan revival of this giant revolution of religion and dedicating new temples all across and incorporating the Egyptian rites and the Phrygian rites and all the Syrian stuff, even in that point in time, you were still going to Delphi to get initiated. You're still going to Athens and Eleusis. Those were still the main points. So I wonder, it's almost like that. Maybe that's just how pagan religion is done. It's just, yeah.
I think kind of, because even in the ancient world, like there was so much like variance between different pagans. Different like tribes would specialize on different gods. And into people's individual practices, you saw a little bit of variance person to person, because I think paganism inherently is going to have more variance than say a Christian spirituality. But even then, all the Christians have their like 8 million different sects.
Right, exactly.
Personal practice, like there's so many deities out there. There's so many different ways to do ritual and ceremony. You're going to see variances person to person. Like even people within, I would say the same like categories that I fall in, like I still have differences with them. And the nice thing about the online pagan community is you see a lot of openness in like different theological views and opinions, which I quite like. I can talk to a lot of people who have slightly different perspectives than I, and gain a lot from that. It is, I would say, more like open-ended though than like a standard religion would be.
Yeah, and I think there is a good reason for it. I just thought of this because in the pagan world, I don't even like using that word pagan. Like, do you like that? Whatever. Let's just use it just for the sake of conversation, just because that language is very, very restrained. So we'll just say in the pagan world, they're really like the people who are at the Delphi, or the people who are at Eleusis, or people who are at Syria, they believe in those other gods still exist. They're not like Christians will say that God doesn't exist, but in the world of paganism, all the gods exist. Even if it's not the one you're initiated in, you still think that the people over there are doing some real stuff. You're not like saying they're wrong. You're just not. That's just not your outlet. And I don't know if you ever read Apuleius's Golden Ass. He's initiated into like 5 different magical or 5 different secret societies, or whatever you call it. He's getting initiated into Isis. He's getting initiated into the rites of Dionysus, and he's like trying all of them And so I think that was kind of a normal thing to do that. I don't think you thought like, here's the real one, those are the fake ones. Like you kind of thought like, they're all real, but this is the one I'm a part of.
That's how most pagans I've met think about it. And if you look historically, all these gods kind of moved around as these tribes and civilizations changed. Like you'll see a god kind of moving from somewhere else as like conquest, and these, as these people moved, so did their gods very often. And so as cultures met and collided, certain gods would move around. Like number of gods that we associate with the Greek pantheon, because I think that's the one most people are the most familiar with. They were not all from the same part of Greece. If you look at other nations, you see this as well. And what gets really interesting is you can see certain gods were seen as like more important or venerated more in different sort of tribes, even within the same nation, right? Like certain parts of a country would prefer a certain god over the other one. And generally, people did believe that the other gods existed. There are different theological explanations for this that you can sort of put into two broad categories, being soft polytheism and hard polytheism. Mm-hmm. Hard polytheism is the belief that all of these gods are distinct, separate entities that all exist. And then soft polytheism is kind of how some Hindus explain it, where all these gods, they're faces of the same sort of broad emanation that goes through all the world and through us. And that kind of like, I don't know, pantheisty explanation of it. And so these gods, like you can argue, okay, so you worship a lot, right? You in Saudi Arabia, you worship a lot. Us up here, we worship Inanna Ishtar, and us up here, we worship Venus and Athena, right? All those gods, they have similar epithets. So some people would say, yeah, we're all actually worshiping the same god. We're just calling it a different thing. Whereas some people hate that approach. And some pagans.
Do you know what's so crazy about what you just said? 500 or how many years ago is 500 BC?
A long time.
2,500 years ago.
Very long time.
Herodotus said exactly what you just said. He said the people in Arabia worship a goddess called Alat, and they say she's equivalent to Venus, who's also equivalent to Demeter, who's also equivalent. And he's doing this syncretism thing. This is happening 2,500 years ago. And so people today doing that are not in the wrong at all. They're just pointing out that these gods have similar attributes. They are both identified with a certain planet. They're both identified. So there's not. And so what do you think about syncretism right now happening? People identifying. I think this is normal, right?
I'm really pro syncretism. I very much sympathize with a somewhat perennialist perspective. So I syncretize a lot. I pull from different pantheons. It's historically based. Like I don't see a problem with syncretism. Yeah. And the traditions that I sort of began my journey through were really syncretic. So it's always been something I've been comfortable with, and it's something that's existed for a really long time. I think it makes sense. We have all these resources and this information. People in the ancient world, if they had as much as we had now, would be doing the same thing, right?
Absolutely.
Like we saw these people traveling around, like these, especially like people who are merchant traders, did a lot of this discovering other gods in different places because they were the ones moving around the most. And then they would bring it back, and then they would talk with their people, and you know what I mean? Like people spread their knowledge amongst each other a lot. There's a specific document that really exemplifies this to the extreme, and it's from antiquity. It's the Greek magical papyri, the PGM.
Yeah. I got a copy of it. Yeah.
Oh yeah. But it syncretizes like Greek stuff. You see some Egyptian stuff in there. You see some Kabbalah. Like people have been like mixing stuff for the longest time, especially people like me who are very magic, mysticism, occult oriented. We want to find out the truth, and we got to figure this out by experimenting somehow. So if these people over here are doing that, I'm going to try it and see what happens. And so there's kind of been a lot of that for a very, very long time.
Yeah. What the Greek magical papyri shows us is that we have one vision. We have one view of like how state religion was run, and like the state cults, the state temples, like the Temple of Jerusalem, they did this and they worship Yahweh. But when you look at these papyri and you put them together like people have done with the magical papyri, you see that in private religion, in private homes, people are doing something way different than what's going on with these paid high priests that are government paid. The people in private homes are saying, okay, we have all these gods. We're going to worship all of them. We're going to invoke Athena for this. We're going to invoke Bacchus for that. We're going to do this and that. And they're all over the place. And so, and even in the 4th to 7th century, I talked to Dr. Andrew Henry, who is from Religion for Breakfast. He said, even in the 4th to 7th centuries, when Christianity was becoming what it is, people are still doing that. You just don't see about it because they don't have access to libraries. They're not writing books. They don't have that power. So they're just doing. So you have to hear about it through like people talking about it. But he said that's still a thing. People are still, even in Europe, people are doing that. So that never went away. Like people talk about New Ageism. It's not New Ageism. It's just the same thing people have always done.
Yeah, the only thing you can call New Ageism, I guess, if you want to say it, is the ideas that came out of Theosophy.
Sure.
Because that's kind of what a lot of the New Age is. It's just like weird Theosophy at this point.
Yeah.
But this stuff is not New Age at all. It's very old. And
Yeah.
even today, there are still people who practice in private, like a syncretic Christianity that they don't in church. Santeria is the perfect example of this. There's some of that even in the U.S., which is it's like a Catholic with these orishas, you know what I mean? Like it's a very syncretic thing. People are still doing that. And I would say that's a continuation of what people were doing. A lot of people, when Christianity came around, I mean, they didn't want to give up the religion they already had, right? People were not a big fan of that, right? They were going to inherently like syncretize and mash things up. I mean, certain dates in Christianity we know were put on those days for that purpose. Saint Bridget. Bridget was the name of a Celtic goddess in Ireland who was incredibly popular. And they're like, there's this woman, Bridget, who is like very saintly. Let's just turn her into a saint now. She's not a goddess, she's a saint, guys. So you're revering a saint now, actually.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of that. And it's not just in Christianity. There are other Abrahamic religions with that in there too. People like to discuss Christianity the most, but every religion pulls from what's before it. And there's some like weird crypto-paganism in pretty much every monotheistic religion.
Oh yeah, with Christianity, especially when you have the Eucharist, for example. And the Eucharist is an example. In the Eleusinian rites, you had the same, you would eat the bread and it would be it's representing Demeter, grain. And drinking the wine is representative of Bacchus, the grape. So blood and body, taking in the gods and becoming the gods, is something we saw way before Christianity. And Christianity just kind of takes it and like privatizes it and like changes it a little bit, but then like you forget where it really came from. But that Eucharist rite was already something that was in the mystery religion world long before Christianity. So there's a perfect example of that.
And what's so funny about it is like the pagan revival has stolen some things from Christianity, which is
gonna come back, right?
Like everything just like takes, you know what I mean?
That's how it is.
People just do that. I know people get like up in arms about it and think it's like really bad. I mean, people just borrow from what they're exposed to previously. I really just think it's natural religious evolution. Like,
right.
I don't know. Some pagans do it as like a gotcha to Christianity, and some Christians are like, well, why are you using prayer beads? We use those. And I'm like, it's
I've heard a Christian say that when he was approached about Saturnalia being the December festival before Christmas, he said, well, it's ours now, so too bad. Like like almost like a conquering thing. Like, yeah, maybe it was pagan before, but now it's Christian, so haha. And I was like, wow, that's an interesting approach to this. Most Christians try to just deny it and pretend it didn't happen.
It's a pretty intellectually honest, answer. Sure. I respect it more, than saying there's no pagan elements. Of course, there are some things that are not pagan in Christianity. I'm not some like crazy pagan who's like literally everything is pagan, but there is very obviously pagan stuff that's pulled over into it. Like there's no real denying that, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Before I get to some of these super chats, one thing I just popped in my head was there's a story that Plutarch writes about, and he says that there was a statue in modern day Turkey in the city of Sinop, right off the coast of the Black Sea. And there was a statue of Hades there. And this was a very famous statue of Hades. And when the Ptolemaic dynasty was like after the Alexander the Great conquest, and Ptolemy I built the city of Alexandria, they were building the Serapeum to worship Serapis. This is a new god that they're inventing. They're combining Osiris and the bull Apis. So we already have one syncretism right there. Bull Apis and Osiris, Serapis. Now they're looking for a statue for it. The statue that they went to find, supposedly he had a dream that Serapis came to him and said, go to Sinop, take the statue of Hades. So he does this. He brings the statue of Hades in. Now Plutarch says that the statue of Hades was identified in Latin as Pluto. Pluto and Hades are the same god. So there's another syncretism there. So we have Pluto, we have Hades as a statue. They're taking this statue and they're saying they're going to cross off the name Hades and put Serapis on it. So now we have 4 gods. We have the Osiris, we have the Apis bull, Pluto, Hades, and then to top it all off, Plutarch says, yeah, this god is actually the same as Dionysus as well, because Osiris is identified as Dionysus back when Herodotus was talking about this topic, because they're both chthonic deities that they're represented by the grape and the vine. They both wear ivy diadems. So now we have 5 gods that are wrapped into one, and I just think it's just there's, even in the ancient world, there's no escaping syncretism. It's just how. And it's like music today. People have music, like a new song will come out. It might sound a little bit like a song that came out 20 years ago because it's influencing them a little bit, even if they don't even realize it. That's just how it is.
Oh yeah, no, syncretism is everywhere, and that like name combining thing, that is a thing you see. A lot of the modern occult traditions have taken that up, where they'll do these like composite names, and so it's essentially like, I call it composite deities, where you'll like put these names together in a specific order, and it'll be combining specific epithets and representing specific things. Combining, if you have ever read the Book of the Law, yeah, that idea will make reading that exponentially easier the next time you take a look at it. Sure. Because otherwise it is a little, actually it's still perplexing. There's no way to not have that book be a little perplexing.
Yeah.
You're like way too deep into this stuff, but that's a little tip for y'all.
Yeah, if you want to talk, you and I talked about Aleister Crowley last time you were on, so if anyone wants to check that out, it was like 8 months ago, something like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's some super chats, so let's pop them up. Samantha Jennings, thank you for the super chat. Really appreciate that. Hey, Georgina, are you initiated into any rites?
So that is a question that I keep private.
Oh, I was wondering if you're gonna.
Certain things you gotta keep secret. So
sure,
I don't answer that. I don't publicly say whether I am or am not affiliated into any specific groups, orders, initiations, or anything like that, because that is my private stuff. So I'm sorry for the disappointing answer. You'll also notice this a lot when you talk to esoteric people who are practitioners. Certain people will kind of not want to share certain information because it's like between them and the gods. And if you actually start doing the rituals and doing the magic, you'll notice that sometimes a spirit will actually tell you something, or something will happen and they'll explicitly tell you to not repeat it. So I will not be answering that one. But
and if you think that's odd, I want to refer you to an ancient writer named Aeschylus. Now, Aeschylus was initiated into the rites of Eleusis, and he went on trial, and they were going to kill him because he exposed that he was a member. You're not allowed to expose the secret rites. You're supposed to keep them private. It's just default. So he had to flee Athens to not die because he exposed too many of the ancient rites into his poems. So you're not the only one that's not allowed to say if you're initiated or not. This has been a thing forever. So yeah. Thank you for that. Gina McDonald, thank you for the super chat. Is there any political divide in the magic community?
Yes. Ooh. Yes, there is. Just like, okay, look, microcosm, macrocosm, as above, so below. There is political divides in the magic community, just like every other part of this world. And there has been for a long time. There's actually been metaphysical, weird, spiritual wars of sorts between people underlying major geopolitical conflicts multiple times. So yeah, there are magical people on all sorts of sides of the political aisle, and they certainly fight just like everyone else.
Do you think, have you ever seen somebody get pushed out of a certain group because of their political alignment? Has that ever happened before?
It depends on the group. Some will do that and some will not. There's definitely a lot of infighting about politics in all these groups. I personally am of the opinion, talk about politics is fine, but I do think when we're in ritual space, I don't want to hear a word about it.
I agree.
If occultist is just on social media posting about their politics, I don't care. But I think in actual ritual, I don't want to hear about it. But you'll definitely notice if you look at pagans online, people have different political opinions, and a number of people are open about them.
I noticed that with the Norse pagans, there's a split. So some of the more modernized, I guess you would say, they're a lot more progressive, but I see them Ocean Keltoy and those guys are sort of duking it out and having these exposed videos on each other with some of the more traditional Norse
pagans or
dramatic. the dramatic ones could be a little bit more traditional, so they might
Yeah.
have some views that people won't like.
Yeah, the Nordic pagans are the most extreme on this issue, I would say. Other groups, you see it, but it's less in your face. Those guys, on either side, you see people on really extreme positions in all sorts of directions, in that community in particular. I'm not a Nordic pagan. That's like a series of esoteric mysteries I don't know as much about. So it's never been something I was called to. So it's not my personal practice. There's some interesting stuff in there. Like, I think the runes are really metaphysically powerful. I've messed with them a teeny tiny bit, not much. But there's stuff there. But that community they like to fight each other, and they have a lot of drama going on over there.
Wow, interesting. Thanks for that. Jason Sobek is joining the membership. Thanks, Jason. Appreciate that. It's always good to see you in the chat. Let's see what the next question is. I'm trying to see if there's any questions besides the super chats. Nothing. Okay. Are you a vampire?
Yes, you caught me, guys. I really thought I could get away with not letting that out. That's totally. You know,
is there any magical rites that have to do with? Is there any is vampirism a thing or no?
It's fringe. There are a few people.
Okay.
It's not something I am really invested in. I don't know if
How would you practice that? Do you have to
I think they just do it from what I've noticed is most of them are they call themselves energy vampires. They basically are just psychically leeching people. But I'm pretty sure that's a more new age thing. It's I've never met anyone in person who claims to be one. There are a few on the internet, but it's not widespread. In terms of vampire aesthetics though, the aesthetics we can steal some of those aesthetics.
Yeah, that's interesting. Let me see. I think there's another question coming up from. Here we go. Drawing Down the Stars. This is from my buddy Lord Snappy. Go and subscribe to his channel. He's starting a podcast very soon, and go and subscribe for sure. Yeah, thank you for that. The New Age is important in many occult movements, whether it's the returning of the golden age of Saturn, the end of the Kali Yuga, the dawning of the age of Aquarius, Crowley's Aeon of Horus, or Aeon of Mott. Thoughts on that? That's a good comment.
When I say the New Age, I was referring to the movement, the people who are New Agers, not the idea of a new age. The idea of a series of ages or aeons or cycles is pretty ubiquitous in esotericism. There's different terms for them. I'm going to say a really hot take here. Kali Yuga and Aeon of Horus is the same thing. The end of the Kali Yuga and the Aeon of Mott, now that's the same thing as well. That's my hot take for the night.
Wow, interesting. So would you consider that to be another syncretist movement on putting those two together?
Oh, that's my personal opinion. Sure. That's not a widely held opinion. But that would be syncretism. I think the idea is really parallel because when we talk about the Kali Yuga, that's this dark, chaotic age in Hinduism and other Eastern Vedic traditions. Aeon of Horus is the dawning of this. Once again, it's this new age. But what Aeon of Horus is really about is a bunch of new movements coming out, a bunch of change and transition. It's the death of the old age, the beginning of the new order. And Kali Yuga is transitional as well. The Aeon of Mott is the Aeon of stability, and that's what Thelemites believe comes after the Aeon of Horus. And that's equilibrium. I mean, Mott itself, think about that concept means in any sort of Egyptian pagan belief, right? It's that tranquility and evenness. The end of the Kali Yuga is when this dark age, this chaotic age ends. Calling it the Aeon of Horus or the Kali Yuga is kind of looking at it from different angles, but I think the attributes actually overlap quite a bit. It's just kind of what perspective you're taking it on. But I think they're the same thing. That's my really spicy take. I'm sure some people will be upset about that, but
I think Crowley's, and I think that's a good point because Crowley's identifying Horus, who's the divine child, who's the son of Isis, and the divine child brings in the new, but also healing and.
If you want to get more specific in how he predicted it, so when you look at the Book of the Law, it's Nuit, Hadit, and the crown and conquering child, Ra-Hoor-Khuit. Ra-Hoor-Khuit is this god of vengeance and the sun. Kali Yuga, Kali. Kali herself, she's a war goddess, right? You see the parallels popping up here?
Yeah.
And if you read through the final chapter of the Book of the Law, which is narrated by Ra-Hoor-Khuit, it's very fiery and warlike, but there's also these new ideas coming out and this new forward progression. And so I think these two ages are similar. There are a number of other terms people come up, but the idea of like ages, aeons, cycles, very common in esoteric beliefs. Not every esoteric belief has them. I think it's a very logical way to look at time, but yeah.
Interesting. Thank you for that super chat. It's good point. Bina Witch has a question. Why some occultists recommend destroying the chakras to avoid attracting parasites?
I don't think that's possible. I don't know who has told you this, but I would not listen to that. I don't think you can destroy your chakras. I mean, chakras or whatever you want to call them, every tradition has a different term for them, but they're essentially the idea of like energetic points on the body, on your metaphysical body. And they're different terms for them, right? Not everyone uses the term chakra. Every tradition has like a name for them, right? Like some sort of energetic map on the body. And I don't think you can destroy that. That would be just destroying your energetic body. I don't think that makes sense. And I don't even know how you would go about like destroying your chakras. In terms of attracting like spiritual parasites, just like banish a lot and you're fine. Just like do cleansing and banishing and purification and you're literally fine. I not to like throw shade at whoever gave you that advice, but I would not listen to that advice at all.
Yeah,
I don't even know how you would do that, to be honest.
Well, that actually brings me to another. Before I get to the next super chat, this is actually important. What do you suggest for people? Because when you go on the internet, you're going to get so much misinformation, probably more misinformation than good information. What do you do, and what do you think people should do to sort of sift through that?
Figure out where the person you're listening to is pulling from. That will help you a lot because that'll clarify a lot of things. Every occultist or pagan on the internet is clearly coming from some tradition or angle. And sometimes it's a fusion of a few traditions. But figuring out, like looking at someone's page, like just scroll for a while and see like if they ever explain themselves, or even if there's someone who never directly stays where their path is, look at what they talk about the most. And you can kind of figure out what their perspective is. That will help you because I think knowing what traditions a person is kind of pulling from clarifies a lot. And generally like thinking logically about it. Like if you hear something said by someone and just think about it for a couple minutes and be like, does this make sense? Also check whoever that person is citing, like what names are they bringing up when they reference things, like what tradition are they pulling from, or are they just kind of pulling it out of their ass? Because I think a lot of the misinformation is just people who are coming up with like their own UPG or something, and then they just like say it as like some historic fact, and then people get confused. Just think about things and listen to multiple people. Don't only listen to me. Don't get all your pagan information from me, please. Oh my God, please don't do that. And you'll see quickly like patterns emerge, themes emerge, and you'll be able to sift through it once you're immersed in it for a while. You just have to like start noticing things and noticing patterns, and you'll figure it out, right? Like it makes more sense with time.
I would say, because me personally, I go deep. I'm learning Greek and Hebrew. I'm also planning on learning Coptic and Latin at some point because I want to be able to go to the primary sources itself and be able to translate and look at what these people are writing down. But you don't have, like, I'm not saying that people should all do that because no one has the time for all that. But we do live in the age of information to the point where most of the primary sources are already translated.
Oh, almost every single like occult book you can find like people talking about it online. Or if it's an out of print occult book, it's probably online on sacred text or hermeticlibrary.com. You can find a lot of this stuff. Like there's even like really niche stuff you can find. Sometimes it takes a little more digging. Like I found a lot of, not a lot, but as much as you probably can on like Arabian pagan stuff online recently in a rabbit hole I went down a couple months ago that I've been on. And there's like stuff out there even on that, which is a very, very niche tradition. So you just have to dig. Like there's so much on the internet, which is great. And I like it, but there's all that misinformation stuff. Also, the other thing to look out for is if someone is just like saying stuff that you think is just really extreme to like just get attention. Like if someone's like, oh my God, I worship this deity and my entire house burnt down. Like maybe don't listen to that person. Maybe don't do that. I'm not joking. There was someone who said that they bought a crystal and their house burned down and their parents died. I'm not joking. This was a real thing that happened on the internet. And I was like, okay, yeah, opinion discarded there.
Yeah. So yeah, you got to just be able to notice right off the bat if someone's bullshit or not.
Yeah.
But see, I'm the type of person where if I read like Crowley or Manly P. Hall, especially Manly P. Hall, if I'm reading through Manly P.
So
Hall's,
many references in his stuff. Like,
yeah, I have it over here
he
somewhere.
references everything.
Well, that's what I'm saying. When I'm going through Manly P. Hall, is especially his what is it called, through the ages.
Yeah.
And when he cites something, my first reaction is to stop reading Manly P. Hall and then find that text and read what he's reading. Like, if you look behind me, I have like 100 primary. These are all Oxford and Penguin. I have all the ancient primary sources of like Apuleius or Aeschylus, and so I like to get into. I want to know what they're reading, and the reason why I brought that up is because another thing you can do is for like source checking is just to read the primary sources yourself. Make your own, draw your own opinion, and then
certain traditions you kind of have to. You hit a wall after a certain point with some of them.
Exactly.
Like, and you're like, oh, I don't know where I'm going to get anything else. Also, looking into like archaeological and historical sources can be very helpful. Because certain things, like, you're going to run out of like how to do books, like after a certain point, especially if it's more niche tradition. If you're talking about like Greek paganism, I mean, you're never going to run out of like how to be a Greek pagan books if there's a million of them. But if you get into the niche ones, you're going to eventually probably have to learn a language, or I don't know, spend a lot of time on Google Translate's website. I don't know, something like that.
That's the thing about Greek is the way Greek is structured, there can be 20 different translations to one paragraph. Like, these one person can, and you can read the different translations, and they're not the same at all. They're completely different.
I noticed that with the Orphic hymns. So I really like the Orphic hymns.
Thank you.
That's I don't speak example. Greek, but I have read different translations, and they are really different. And I was like, what is happening here?
Okay, so let me tell you, I want to give everybody some homework right now. Do this. Go online, look up the Greek Orphic hymns. Take any of them. Pick a random one. I don't even care. Take Hercules, for example. Copy and paste the Greek. Enter it into Google Translate. Hit enter. It's going to be a bunch of word soup, google gobble nonsense, because you cannot translate this text from a Google translator. If you compare that Google Translate to Thomas Taylor's translation, who I have right
now, I think that's the standard one.
That's the standard. The best translation
I use. Also, if you're new to any sort of paganism and you want to do invocations or rituals, the Orphic hymns, you can use those. Those are really good. They're very ritualistically potent. I have told people who get advice from me to use them like 8 million times. They're really good.
Absolutely. And if you don't have the time to learn Greek and read the Greek, just go to Thomas Taylor. Thomas Taylor has the best translation. So, with that being said, the reason why I even brought that up is because when you compare the translation that you type in from Google to Thomas Taylor, it's like you're not even reading the same thing anymore. So you have to realize that Greek is it's a very complex language. It can be translated in a lot of different ways. Like even Christianity, the Gospel of John in the original Greek, people translate logos into words. Some people translate into reason. You have some people translate the word life into something besides, because the Greek word is Zoe. Some people make that a noun. Some people don't make it a noun. There's different ways you can translate even the Christian text. So Greek itself is it's like a magic language. I really do think there's something magical about Greek. It's powerful. I love it. That's why I'm trying to.
Languages have a spiritual dimension to them, and certain things you will want to do in the original language, even if you're stuck reading a transliteration or something.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for that, being a witch. Appreciate that. Let me see. There was another question before the super chat that wasn't a super chat. Maybe it was another being a witch one. Thank you. Why would some occultists say that the chakra system leaves you vulnerable to parasites, and that is the best to eliminate them altogether?
We just answered that. That's
okay. That's just another. Okay, all right. Sounds good. Let me see what else we got. Oh, this was from. Where'd it go? I just saw it too. Oh, here we go. Have you read Fortune's fiction? It's pretty wild as well. Sobek, Lord of the
I've read a lot of her esoteric books. I've actually never read her fiction. I have not.
Interesting.
I've been told it's good. I liked Ion Fortune, genuinely. Her book, Sane Occultism, I read really recently, and it was really, really helpful. And it was kind of funny because what Sane Occultism is, it's a commentary on like how to be an occultist successfully and not lose your mind, basically. Like it's kind of like a commentary book in an interesting way. And it was a lot of the same discussions I've had online, and I was like, whoa, we have been arguing about the same things for so long. It's a really good read. Though if you want to get introduced to her, maybe that's not the best first read, but she's really great. But I've not read her fiction, actually. I haven't read a lot of occult authors' fiction, but I have read Crowley's fiction. But that's about it, I think, for occult authors who've written fiction that I've read.
Nice. Thanks for that question, Sobek. Your friendly neighborhood black man. I like that name. Thanks for the super chat. I'm curious as to whether monsters can connect to magic and paganism or not, as cryptids and folklore are drawing people's eye.
I would say it depends on what you mean by cryptid, because I think cryptid can refer to a lot of different spirits. Some things exist in a magical context and in an esoteric context, and I don't see a lot popping up, like other ones popping up. So it depends on what you're referring to. Like Fae, sure, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't, but you can. Jinn, yeah, that's a thing. People do that. Like it just depends on what you're referring to with that. Whereas like I don't see anyone like conjuring. I'm sure there's someone out there who's tried to conjure like anything, but you know what I mean. Like I don't. But like some of the like cryptids that we talk about in the U.S., like I don't really see people trying to work with magically. So depends. I'm gonna give that a depends.
Thanks for that super chat. Interesting question. Let's see. Dan Smith says, if you had to choose to join Sister Cindy's worship or Det Darling's worship, which would you choose?
I'm just gonna laugh at that. That's just funny to me.
Is that an inside joke that
it must be? I don't fully get it, but I think it's funny. I'm gonna assume it's meant to be funny. So
okay.
But I don't fully understand.
Thanks for that question. Mojo, thank you for the super chat. Is Kali Lilith and Adam and Eva Shiva and Parvati?
I would not correspond Kali and Lilith. I think their attributes are too different.
Yeah, right. No offense. I don't mean that to be like. It's a good question. It's a good question.
Lilith is one that people really like to correspond like everything to.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the correspondences people give to Lilith are not correct. Like I see a lot of people trying to take any like war and love or like darker love goddess and say they're the same as Lilith. And I'm like, Lilith isn't a love goddess. Lilith is not a love spirit. First of all, Lilith's not a goddess. But second of all, like Lilith doesn't rule love. That's not what Lilith rules. So
yeah. Now
people try to correspond everything to Lilith. I think that Lilith is very specific. The closest of all parallels, I guess, would be Inanna Ishtar, but even then, I don't think that's a proper correspondence. I don't think that works either.
Yeah, because I don't know if Inanna Ishtar rules time at all. I'm not sure if that's a thing.
Well, Inanna Ishtar is it's different, because Inanna Ishtar was a more like, because this is the thing, Lilith is about rejection, right? Lilith is not a...
Inanna Ishtar is about salvation.
Lilith is rejecting. If you look at the Alphabet of Ben Sirah, which is where we get the Lilith lore from, not the Torah, but in the Alphabet of Ben Sirah, what Lilith does is rejects, right? And then becomes like a demon. That's not like a love-attracting spirit. That's like the opposite of that. Like just, so I think a lot of the Lilith correspondence don't make sense. And I guess you're getting Kali because like dark feminine, I'm guessing. But even then, I think Lilith is a specific thing. Lilith is very specific. Lilith actually predates Judaism. And there are these spirits called the Lilitus in that region that were not goddesses. They were these like kind of demon-y spirits. They were these like lesser spirits that... Yeah,
daemons.
Yeah, and then there is Lamashtu, which is a Sumerian Mesopotamian goddess who is pretty similar to Lilith, but even then, like, it's a little different. I guess that's your closest parallel, but I don't know really anyone who... I'm sure there is actually someone who worships Lamashtu. There are people who worship everyone, but...
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to synchronize the Eastern and Western unless you go to unless you can go to language, because that Indo-European language system helps us identify, like, for example, Deias Patar, the Sky Father, Jupiter, and then you have Deias in India and the Vedas. So you have a Sky Father. You can see the connection through language. You can use language to connect. I actually have an expert philologist coming on in a couple weeks to talk about this, and I can't wait to do that. And so
do the Hindu gods assigned to each planet to the Western gods assigned to each planet.
That's another way to do it. That's good.
That's an easy way. But otherwise, Hinduism and Western polytheism have quite a few differences. I think that you can, but there's it's difficult, but it's possible. I don't tend to attempt it, but some will work, some will not. But I think it is a lot harder than syncretizing other Western pagan gods.
Yeah, because in the West we actually have texts from the ancient world, like Egyptians identifying Isis with Ishtar, or Greeks identifying Demeter with Ishtar, or Demeter with Isis. So you have this role, this grain goddess, this fertility goddess, because fertility goes hand in hand with the growing of crops. Fertility in crops. When it's springtime, when the crops grow, everyone's happy. Everyone goes out and parties. Fertility, boom. So there's a reason why those two are married. That's why you have Tammuz and Ishtar get married. When Tammuz dies, his body gets brought down to the underworld, and Ishtar, or in another text, it's Inanna. They have the same story, different time periods and different. One's Sumerian, one's Assyrian. Anyways, she goes down into the underworld, and it says for 3 days too. Brings his body up, and as he's resurrected, the dead are raised with him, which is the crops growing. So you have this agricultural story of a savior goddess bringing up Demutsi and bringing fertility and agriculture go hand in hand. Boom.
There's so many of these like less known pagan myths that are like kind of crazy to hear in the context of being someone who's only heard like mainstream Abrahamic perspectives. My favorite is some of the Arabian pagan context, because a lot of that like kind of breaks your brain if you're unfamiliar with it. Like a lot of those myths, they're like, whoa. They like kind of shatter some Abrahamic perceptions and make you look at these religions like differently. But in terms of Hinduism and Western paganism, I think we should interact and have conversations with each other, but I think it is fundamentally different on a lot of levels. And so like the communities, we should learn from each other. I think that we have a lot to learn from the way that Hinduism is the longest surviving polytheistic tradition. There's a lot we can take from them, but I think fundamentally it is a different thing and it's a different paradigm entirely. That's kind of how I see it, at least. I enjoy talking to Hindus a lot, though. I've had Hindus on my podcast. I've taught. I know Hindus. I speak with them, and they're interesting. But I do think we are kind of doing something a little different. If that makes any sense. Definitely,
I think that's a good way to put it. Let's see if we got any other questions. Here we go. Being a witch. Thank you for the question. Fire is associated with swords and the staff, which is essentially a large wand. Is it associated with the element of air? Why is this so?
This is a like correspondence that comes from like tarot and Golden Dawn operating. You get this as that tradition. Other traditions have actually swapped the swords, fire, air wand thing. This swaps depending on what you're looking at. Funnily enough, I think fire and swords make sense because if you look at spirituality to fire, I mean, there's that aggression of a sword. It stabs, it penetrates, sword, fire, and violence. But there are people who swap that. So depends on what you're looking at. I think it makes sense because, like, obviously, like, swords, violent, fire, violent. Whereas the wand, you use it to point. It's more dainty. And air is more effervescent and flowy.
Interesting. Thank you for that question. Good answer, too. Jason Sobek in the house. We need more women's perspectives on the history and study of the occult. Keep up the great work, Georgina. And when are you teaming with Dr. Sledge?
If he ever wants to collaborate with me, I will absolutely do that.
I can link you with him for sure. It was a good friend of mine.
I've spoken with him a little bit in private, but I've never collaborated with him publicly. We've spoken a bit though. He seems cool. It's always interesting when I talk to people like that because like I'm a practitioner and I believe he's an academic, right?
Yes.
Yeah. It's always
he's actually a PhD. People think he's got a PhD in like religious studies. He's a philosopher. He's a full-blown PhD in ancient philosophy. So he knows everything about, well, I shouldn't say everything. He's probably gonna be like, don't say that. But he knows more than anyone I know about like Platonic. You know how like people don't realize Platonism is so complex.
Oh, it's crazy.
It would take an entire lifetime to learn everything. But if you want to know someone who knows from my opinion, who knows the most is Dr. Sledge. He knows the most by far.
Yeah, no, talking to an academic versus a practitioner, you're going to hear very different things. Like I'm a practitioner. Yeah. I'm not an academic.
Sure.
I'm not like a professor. I just am I'm a practitioner, right? And so I approach it from how can I use this in ritual and how can I gain gnosis from this? And then they're like studying like it from a completely different angle. So I actually I've done podcasts with Angela Puka.
Yeah, me too.
On my show, and I've come on her channel. And that was a really, really interesting conversation because our experiences are just so different. But, we talk about the same kind of stuff. Platonism is having a big moment, too. I've noticed a bunch of people are becoming like these polytheist Platonists. Like, it's becoming a big thing. I've covered it a bit on my podcast. Like, I had a couple of these Platonists on, where basically what's happening right now, if you're unaware, is there's these people who are Greek, like Hellenic polytheist, who are getting really into Platonism. And they're like, okay, so we have modern Greek paganism, and we're basically focusing like entirely on, the practical side of it. But we haven't really thought of the philosophic side. We're like, we have this giant philosophic tradition. Why are we not listening to this? Why are we not thinking about this? Why are we not incorporating this into our religion? And so they're trying to like reintegrate Greek philosophy into modern practical, like living Greek paganism, and it's been a really interesting movement. I've really liked seeing it, actually, and I'm optimistic about it. I'm not a Platonist myself, but I think a lot of their perspectives make sense.
Whoa, we just got a whole plethora of super chats that all popped in at the same time, and thank you for everybody who's engaged in this chat. I'm really enjoying this. I just want to, before we move on to the next one, I like getting your perspective. I also like getting Dr. Puka's perspective. I like hearing both sides, the academic side and the practitioner side, because there's a lot to be learned in both ways. It's like we can't just rely on the academics for all the information. We need to go to people who are doing this, who are living this, who have the experience. There's people who have experience on hand. There's people who have education in a classroom. So it's two different things. And I'm not saying one's better or more.
No, I think they're just different.
Right.
It's just different. Like, that's really how we see it. We're approaching it from a different angle. And both are valuable. I know a lot of occultists read the academic stuff. Like, I read Manna Hindenburg White's book that she published. She's an academic. She's a professor, and she published a book on like the divine feminine and Thelema. And it's this like very scholarly book. But I read it, and then I was like, now I'm going to use this in ritual. I'm stealing these ideas. Thank you very much. And so they're helpful to us. And without us, what would they be studying? You know what I mean? It's a nice, good relationship between these two groups of people. I like the academics, and they need us. So
absolutely. Good point. Thanks for that super chat. Yakuv, it's Rain. Thank you for the super chat. Any revival of Canaanite paganism?
It's niche, but it's a thing. I don't think you're going to find like local groups for it, but I've seen some people like starting like online communities about it, and I've seen people writing about it. I've seen the most discussion about like kind of like Sumerian-y paganism, which is regionally similar. So if you probably find those people, they can probably connect you. I've seen groups for Nabatean paganism. I've seen groups for Arabian paganism. And I know there are Canaanite pagans because I've met some of them online. So you can find them if you look around.
That's really interesting. I would definitely want to look into that. I never thought about that. I don't know why I haven't thought about that, but I'm definitely going to try to find someone.
Yeah. When it gets into these more niche forms of paganism, you're going to have more of a difficulty finding people who will publicly represent, particularly when it gets to the Middle Eastern forms of paganism, because there are people who practice Middle Eastern forms of paganism, like, in that world, but they cannot attach their face to it for obvious reasons.
Right.
So you're going to find more of a difficulty getting them on your show or something, but they are out there. You just have to look. But yeah, people who are actively practicing these more niche practices, even in the countries that they're living in, even if their country is not a place that is the best to be a pagan.
Right. And they definitely existed even in biblical times, because why would they set up laws preventing people from putting up Asherah poles if they weren't already doing that?
Oh yeah, no, they were around.
Well, they were pagans in that time period too.
Well, if you read like the Torah, especially if you read the Quran has a lot of discussion of his interactions with the Mushrikun.
Yeah.
Mushrikun, however you want to pronounce that. The pagans. So they were around, and they were around kind of longer than the monotheists wanted them to be around. Pagans are really stubborn. I think my favorite, well, not my favorite, it's actually really sad and terrifying. In Al-Kendi's Book of the Idols, which explains the rise of the Islamic world against the pagans and who the pagans worshipped and all that, there's a description of this guy who was a worshiper of Al-Uzza, and he like refused to give up his worship of Uza, and they broke his idol. And of course he freaked out, but he's like, yeah, you're not gonna stop me. And then they execute him, and his like final words are, I am not sad about dying. I mean, I'm paraphrasing this. I'm sad that there will be no one worshiping Aluza anymore, which just breaks my heart. But like a lot of people were very persistent with their beliefs. The last country to convert out of paganism was, I believe, was Lithuania. Latvia is up there too. Like these like kind of smaller, like Central to Eastern European countries.
Germanic,
yeah, they held on to it. Like that part of Europe was pagan for a really, really long time. I think it was even like
that's where you get those stories of Odin.
16 something. It's somewhere between the 12s and the 16s. I don't know the dates, guys.
That's where you get those late Middle Ages, early medieval stories of Odin and Freya.
Yeah. A lot of those people hung around for a long time, and there were not as many as some pagans like to claim, but there were people who kept being secret pagans, just not at the level that some pagans will claim, but
absolutely,
people kept their beliefs. And someone said in chat, are there people still persecuted for their faith? Pagans? Yes, there are pagans in certain countries that are like straight up theocracies.
Right. You know what's interesting though about that, and not to cut you off, this just popped in my head. The story of the Kaaba, the big black box in Mecca. There's 365 gods housed in that box. It was a pagan worship site that would How does no one talk about that? It
was a pagan temple, right? And there were other Kaabas all around the region. There was confirmed one in Yemen that was smashed during the Islamic conquest, but there were others around. It's largely historically recorded that there were multiple Kaabas all over the place, and there are a number of things in modern Islamic practices that were done by the Arab pagans. Not all of it, like it's not all the same, but that Kaaba, it was a pagan site.
And that symbol with the moon and Venus, that's a pagan symbol.
That moon symbol. I got in a bit of an argument with someone about this. They're like, oh no, that's from the Ottoman Empire. And I'm like, yeah, but like why did these old inscriptions have
maybe the Ottoman Empire brought it back. Maybe that's a thing. But that symbol.
Some people will really fight you on that one. Some people But sure. I think it's a holdover. Some people will intensely say it's the Ottomans, though.
Yeah,
I disagree. But I will respect their perspective.
Sure. Yeah. No, I get why they would say that too. I think I can. Yeah. But thank you for that super chat. Drawing down the stars, and Lord Snappy is back with another question. Thoughts on the mystery? Do you wish to die and be reborn? Do you seek aeonic life? Can the mystery be brought back?
That's a very complicated and somewhat personal question. I personally try to live my true will, get close to the gods, live a somewhat virtuous life, and hopefully, that aspirational alchemical great work, and try to understand the truth of what's out there. That's my goal. Method of science, aim of religion, the highest form of religion is truth. I'm trying to figure it out. That's how all mystics have forever been doing it, right? We're all trying to make sense and understand things and, get wisdom and try to live a life in accordance to the wisdom we understand.
Peter Kingsley wrote a book about Parmenides. It's called The Dark Side of Wisdom. And he pieces, because Parmenides, we don't have like a lot of writings for him. We just have like fragments, engravings. We don't really know much about this guy, but we know that his religion that he was trying to promote was like the goddess of justice, the goddess of truth. Like these weren't like literal like gods that you can see and talk to that live in the sky, but they were ideas that were personified. And because those ideas are something to attain, you want truth, you want justice, you want so he deified those ideas. So I think that's an interesting way to put it too.
Yeah, that's kind of like a more Platonic view, right? Is he a Platonist?
Well, yeah, he was a before the Platonist, but Plato talks about Parmenides a lot, so he obviously is in that vein for sure.
I like talking to people who know a lot about philosophy because I'm not an expert on that at all. So apologies for my confusion.
That's a great question, because Parmenides directly influences Platonism. He's one of the fathers of the idea of Platonism. So yeah, that was a great question. But yeah, thanks for that, Lord Snappy. Appreciate that. Haman, thank you for the super chat. Does it make much of a difference, though.
Oh, it's a pun.
No,
Dad. I get it.
I got it. Nice. Thank you for that super chat. That's for you.
I've had most people call it Dat Darling, so I immediately got this. I've people like, oh, hello, Dat Darling, and I'm like,
Yeah.
sure, okay, close enough.
Yeah.
But it is funny. I also, there was one podcast I went on forever ago where they named the episode Darling, and so that became like a joke, DAR, which I just thought was funny.
Nice. Thank you.
For a while.
Mondo Human Carrillo. I think I said that right. Human Carrillo. Thank you for the super chat. He's got the 666. Nice. What do you think of demons like the Goetia and Tainted God?
Goetia.
Goetia.
Yeah, I can talk about the Ars Goetia spirits. So Ars Goetia, if you guys aren't familiar with it, I have a video on it. It's actually my most popular video on my channel. Probably will ever be. Everyone's fascinated by the Ars Goetia, right? Because it's the book about demons. It's the book about demons. It's the big Solomonic book about demons. And the spirits in the Ars Goetia, a lot of people like to say they are pagan gods who got misaligned. The thing, though, if you look through the names of the spirits in that book and try to trace them all back, not all of them are gods. Some of them do predate Abrahamism, but a lot of them are jinn. I would say that's one of the most common things you see in there. Like, a lot of the names are the same as, like, Arabian jinn names, as well. A number of them are names that are more like titles, like Baal.
Yeah.
Baal
Lord
was kind of just a term for regional god that's not my god that those people worship that I don't like. That's kind of what that meant in the ancient world. There are certain gods with similar names like Hubal. And then there are a few that do have the same names as like smaller pagan gods, but they're not all pagan gods, no. Some of them are like unique to the Ars Goetia. But if you really want to trace a ton back, look into the jinn. A lot of them are the same as the jinn.
Wow, that's a good point. Thank you for that. Thanks for that super chat. Let's see what else we got. Oh, Flamio, thank you for the super chat. Is Thrasymachus a part of modern Greek paganism? He is my favorite Greek philosopher. I'm sorry, Thrasymachus. I always say his name wrong. Thrasymachus.
I've heard some people discuss him. I think you'd be looking into like this movement of people who are trying to incorporate ancient Greek philosophy into Greek paganism. Because a lot of the Greek pagan movement has kind of been just about the gods and not as much basis in like what ancient Greek life was like. And so this recent movement you may find interesting. Basically, just look at what modern like Greek pagans right now, like as in the past like year or two. You may like a book that came out really recently. It's Platonism, a Polytheistic Approach by Steve Dillon. He's come on my show. He's on Twitter. He's great. And he's been a big voice in this. So I'm sure he's written about him. He's really into the ancient Greek philosophy stuff. So check him out.
Yeah. I think he's one of the sophists, like the pre-Socratics, one of those guys. But yeah, interesting. Good question. I would ask, that's a good question for Sledge, actually, too. Thank you for that. Imposter Sir Spence, thoughts on the rise of atheism. Is rational thought have any downside? I'm an atheist.
So I'm not an atheist. I'm a theist. Obviously, I'm religious. I do not believe the gods are metaphors. I don't believe they're psychological. I believe they exist. I'm a soft polytheist. I'm a perennialist, but I do believe like they are real. I believe religion is real. I have had personal experiences and ritual that it's either I'm crazy or religion is real. It's like one of the two. You know what I mean? Like I've had really intense experiences. Maybe really? I'm just crazy, you know. Maybe I need to get on some.
You think it's that? There's only two options: crazy or real.
Crazy or real. I've had some really intense ritual experiences. So it's either I'm crazy or it's real. One of the two. And so atheism, I don't particularly align with. I think being an atheist is fine if that's what you want to do. Like it's your life, you know, whatever you want. But I don't think atheism is correct. There are people though who are like atheists. People who still do like rituals and stuff because they think it works on a psychological level, kind of like a really intense placebo effect. Those people might be particularly interesting to you. There's a guy, Ia0131, who wrote a book called Naturalistic Occultism that kind of might be something you'd be into. It's a very like science-y, secular-y occult book. But it's something I don't particularly align with, but there are people who do. So there's still people out there you can find interesting. I don't think rational thought has a downside. And I don't think rational thought is incompatible with religion. I think you should be critical. I don't think you should just blindly believe things. I think that you should like think critically about this stuff and use your brain and be nuanced. That's why I'm a crazy heretic. right? That's like I think too much, okay? That's why I'm not still like a Christian like I was as a kid, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, if you want to be an atheist, that's cool though. I don't have an issue with them.
I honestly think, because I've had this conversation with other theists, and they'll say to me, you know, too much rationalism is also bad, and I disagree with that. I think a society should be as rational. This even goes back to the Epicureans, who thought, you know, Plato was wrong about forms. There's no forms. There's no heaven and hell. It's all atoms and void. Now, whether you agree with that or not, I think society, a government, or an entity, a global entity, should approach things with that rational mindset. I think the opposite of that, if a society is like fundamentalist, theocratic, then you have problems. But within a rational government, I think a government should be rational. Maybe if you want to call it
You
atheist,
need
whatever.
rationality in life. You can't have
Exactly, but I was going to say, but within that country, within that society, people should be able to worship without being poked fun at and saying that's not real, God not. People should have that right, because what you said you had spiritual experiences. That's not fake. Though people have spiritual experiences, even atheists acknowledge that. Even atheists, they'll try to say there's some explanation. It's in the brain. It's some sort of chemicals happening. They'll try to explain it away. Don't get me wrong, but that doesn't mean the experience is not real. So, well, I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's possible. I've seen a number of people who are occultists who call themselves following like the psychological paradigm, particularly people into like chaos magic stuff and like really, really modern occultism, where basically they'll be like, well, I have all these spiritual experiences and I think it's like my mind, but my mind is bigger than we know so far, right? Or they like try to like align it with like quantum physics and stuff like that. Like, you know what I mean? You can be rational and be into spirituality.
Sure.
And I think a little bit of rationality. I wrote an essay on my Substack. I was like, a little bit of doubt isn't inherently like a bad thing. It can kind of give you like a check and balance and keep you grounded in a sense. Yeah. I mean, if you go super far and you're like over rationalizing everything, I mean, I don't think that's great, but I think having some rationality is not bad at all.
I do think it's interesting how when somebody is like in a drug addicted part of their life and they reach rock bottom, they get arrested, they will be pushed into programs that tell them find a higher power, get spiritual. The spirituality is like a healing for people who are in bad places in life. So there's a lot to say about the spiritual.
A lot of spiritual stuff is being backed by science now. Like, I think that, you know, treating science as a religion can be kind of bad. Obviously, science is a method, but, you know, meditation has been kind of, you know, accepted by modern psychology as like a thing that's good for you. Like Carl Jung, he's like an occultist, but also a father of psychology, right? Like they're not fully like incompatible. I don't think they are. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. It's a good question. Appreciate that. Jason Sobek, thank you for the super chat. Are you a Chaldean oracles or Orphic hymns person?
Orphic hymns.
Nice. I agree. Although the Chaldean oracles are pretty dope too. They're pretty sweet, but the Orphic hymns are just perfect. They're beautiful. They really are, and I love them. So let's see. Yeah, I think that's the last super chat. But anything else you want to discuss before we, you know, get out of here? I guess?
I'm open to whatever you want to ask me about, or if you want chat to say something,
Here we go. Can you talk about your holy guardian experiences and give us some advices?
Yeah, so I have not done like any of the huge holy guardian angel rituals at this point. I interviewed a close friend of mine who just completed the Abermelon on my YouTube channel a couple weeks ago. He's someone I've known for a really long time, and he did it. I've done a little bit, like I've done prayers to my HGA and sort of felt a little bit. In terms of the actual guardian spirit I talk to, though, it's not my HGA. I actually have conjured my Kareen, which I haven't talked about this much public. I don't think I've ever brought this up publicly. I did a procedure to talk to your guardian jinn a while ago, and I do that way more than HGA stuff, which, if you don't know, the Kareen is a very specific type of jinn. It is a jinn that is your sort of spiritual double, that is a guiding spirit. It's not the same. Jinn can be good, bad, or all flavors, right? Not all jinn are evil, not all jinn are good. Jinn are like
even
very
the Quran says that.
Yeah, even the Quran backs us up. Muhammad himself claims that he turned his Kareen into a Muslim and made his Quran straight. But yeah, I've done way more Kareen stuff than HGA work. That's my uncommon take. But yeah, HGA work, though, it's powerful. I do eventually plan to do probably one of those big HGA operations. Don't think I'm going to do the Aubermelon. I think I'm going to go the Bornless Ritual Procedure when I get to that point, but I just haven't gotten to it yet because I'm not at a point where I can withdraw from society for an extended period of time for like practical reasons. Like there's practical reasons for it.
Interesting. Thank you for that question, Lillian. Lord Snappy with another question. These are both of these. This can be topics in itself. So I don't know where you want to go with this, but Michael Bertiox, David Beth, and Gnostic Vodun.
I have never read the Gnostic Vodun book. I know these names, but I have not read the Gnostic Vodun stuff. I really haven't. I've heard about it. I've heard people talk about it, but it's not something I've reached yet. I know generally what it is. It's like this really syncretic thing where it mixes a bunch of stuff together. Really doesn't have any connection to like traditional ATR voodoo, but it is interesting stuff. It's just not something I personally have dived into. I'm at the point in my kind of like spiritual path where I'm more reading stuff that relates to where my journey needs to go next instead of general stuff, unless I want to make like a video on some broad topic. So it's just not something that seems like it's in my path right now. So I just haven't really approached it. You know what I mean?
Let me ask you this then, without getting, I know because this is sort of a secretive thing. It's also a private thing, but what can you tell us anything about your path? Like what kind of books you're reading? What kind of deities do you invoke? What kind of hymns you like to read? Anything like that?
Yeah. So I have I had my start in general folk magic, like witchy type stuff, like the kind of mainstream witchy stuff. That's how I got my gateway drug, right? Then I was really, really deep into Thelema, and I still do Thelemic stuff. Basically, what I've done is I take Thelemic ritual formulas and I apply it to polytheism. Because I think Thelema created a very powerful corpus of practical rituals. Whereas a lot of pagan traditions, we don't have a lot of the practical rituals, right? So you have to do a bunch of putting things together, right? We don't know, unless you're using the PGM, exactly what ancient people were doing most of the time. Some things we have, a lot of it we don't, right? We'll see a ritual object that some archaeologists found. We don't really know what that's for. So Thelema has amazing formulations, and I fundamentally believe in the idea of true will. So I believe in the core of Thelema, but not all my practices are what is considered like Thelema proper. That's why I'm like a weird Thelemite. And so I use Thelemic formulations, and I apply that to polytheistic deities. That's what I do. The specific deities I work with are kind of syncretic. It's interesting, though, when you go to work with a deity, you're going to find really quickly if they like you or not. I believe fundamentally that not all goddesses or gods are meant to be your goddess or god. People are drawn to different things. And when you have a spiritual relationship, it's a relationship, right? Like if you start invoking a spirit, you're going to be surrounded by their energy and that experience. And it's going to kind of, you'll see that. So, you'll figure that out. So I don't want to share exactly all of what spirits I work with, but they vary. And they've changed over time as my sort of path has evolved, as I've been doing the occult for longer. What my spiritual needs are change, right? You're going to be changed by your experiences. And so the gods you're like orienting towards are going to shift kind of naturally, if that makes any sense. Like as you keep going, your path changes, and certain deities you'll worship really heavily for a while and then you move along. I'm not a henotheist. I don't only worship one god. That is a thing some pagans do. They only worship one or two gods. I worship like multiple, like more than one. I worship like a lot. You're
like Apuleius.
a lot. Yeah. I'm like everything. I'm like I want every god.
That's how Apuleius was in the ancient writer from the 2nd, 3rd century, I think it was. But he was like, I'm worshiping. I'm going to find them. I'm getting initiated into Isis. I'm getting initiated into Bacchus. I'm getting everything.
Yeah, I want all the initiations. Crowley did something similar. He like initiated like 7 occult groups. And this is the funny thing, like when you meet people who are like really practice oriented, which I'm really practice oriented fundamentally, like I'm like, I want to know everything. I want all the gnosis. Thank you. Give me all the gnosis. Yeah, Pokemon, gotta catch. That's so bad. That's so bad. Please be responsible with what gods you worship and actually devote yourself to them. But that's funny. That's really funny.
That is interesting how you get some people will devote themselves I'm a devotee of Bacchus, and that's their
Oh
god. That's
yeah.
who they
Some people
serve,
are
that god.
very, very singular.
Yeah.
Some people worship multiple, and in the ancient world, you saw this too, right? There were certain people in the ancient world who worshipped one god. There were certain people in the ancient world who worshipped two gods, and then there were certain people who were like moving around, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. Thanks for that super chat. Here's another one. Jamie Lindbrunner says, any reason for head cover?
I sometimes cover my hair, I sometimes don't. I think that there are multiple reasons to do it if you want to. There is like for me, I do it sometimes and it kind of keeps me thinking about religion and thinking about my own, thinking about what I'm doing. I think that if you're into like virtue stuff, there's a modesty element to it. But also some people do head coverings only in ritual, like for a specific intention. You see that a lot. And then some people do it all the time and some people don't at all. I wear it inconsistently. So
yeah, and
I don't.
I notice you're always well dressed and always have like some nice attire on. So that's pretty. Is there just your
There's
style?
no spiritual reason for that. I just am into fashion. I have other hobbies, you know? I'm not just like constantly doing invocations. I do other things as well. And for me, fashion is fun. The head cover thing, though, does have somewhat of a spiritual element to it. I also like certain rings I wear are like consecrated and talismans, and you know what I mean?
Yeah. Thanks for that question. That's a good question. Here's one. Oh, wait, where did it just go? Oh, here we go. Kalo Arepo says, how about Catholic saints? Are they gods?
No, unless they're like Bridget. Unless they're Bridget, who's like a former god that became a saint. I think saints
That's what I was doing, yeah.
they're interceding spirits, right? So when you look at a polytheistic or an esoteric worldview, you're going to understand that there are different spirits that are not gods that were accepted in the pagan world. I think a lot of people like think that all spirits are gods when they get into paganism. And that's not true, right? Like different pagan systems had different other spirits that existed. Like, you know, in the Irish pagan world, there were like fae. You didn't fuck with those, but they existed, right? In there were them everywhere. Every religion had some. You know, like
I noticed that
every system has their own. So I would say if you're going to talk about Catholicism, saints are lesser spirits. I would say they are lesser spirits. They're not gods, no. Unless there's a syncretic one, I guess. Then I guess that's not the same answer.
Did you know that Mount Olympus, where they thought Zeus literally was residing, is now named after a saint in the Catholic Church, or I think Orthodox Church, one of the two. I forgot which one it is.
Actually, there are so many saints.
Yeah, there's that mountain is now Mount Saint something. I forgot what it was, but that used to be the mountain where Zeus and Athena were chilling. Like, isn't that great? Another thing I just wanted to point out, just for the sake of conversation, is the early Christians known as the Carpocratians. They were 2nd century Egyptian Christians, and they worshipped not only Jesus, but they had statues of Pythagoras and Plato.
Huh.
So they were worshiping Plato and Pythagoras as minor daemons next to Jesus.
Huh. That's really interesting. I didn't know that. A lot of the early Christian sects were like really interesting. Heretical and fun ways. Yeah, exactly. Heresy can be a little fun. Okay,
it's amazing. Yeah, I love it.
Good time. Good time.
I wish that form of Christianity would have won out, because we think of this is a false thing we do. I used to do this too. We think of Orthodox as a straight line from Paul up till today. It
wasn't, though.
It's not. It was going like this.
Well, I mean, there was
no orthodoxy until the Nicene Creed. Then they were like, this is Orthodox. Like, but it wasn't that way.
In terms of Christianity I was exposed to growing up, my family was a mix of Episcopal and Mormon. And so when I met like Catholics and Orthodox, I remember I went to an Orthodox church service, and I thought it was actually really beautiful. I actually really liked the vibes. The vibes were very good. But like, I was like, whoa, this is completely different from anything I've ever been exposed to. Like, I almost felt like I was in like a different religion, actually.
Yeah, it's so a lot different. It's a lot different. You go in that Catholic church and they're especially if you go to you can feel the vibe going. Or if you go to a Southern Baptist church where they're singing like real loud and playing music, you know what that is? I was just talking about that. There's something about that. And I think this is what the Baccans tapped into, is that energy of divine mania. The Platonists write about this. Divine mania is power. When you get into
I
that
have
mode,
a
good
friend.
music and good friends and that energy, there's something real about that. Like, you know
I
what I
have
mean?
a friend who's a Thelemite who I know in real life, and we were talking about like the Jesus Dionysus theory. I'm sure you've heard this. The
Absolutely.
like yeah, that theory. And he's like, yeah, I went to this like Pentecostal church with one of my relatives, and I was like, this is a Bacchian moment. She's channeling
Yeah.
Dionysus, and he was like,
And it's like
"Oh, you
they're indirectly getting that Bacchic frenzy.
yeah, he's like, this is actually cool, guys. This is like a cult. And I was like a cult, like with an O,
Yeah,
not
yeah, yeah.
like he's like, guys, the Pentecostals are on to something.
Well,
And I
yeah,
just
but that's the thing.
it was so funny.
That was the last church I attended before I left Christianity, was the Pentecostals. And there, that speaking in tongues, the chanting, the getting up, the running around, the holding snakes and stuff, that's a Bacchic frenzy all day long. And the Bacchics would do the same. Bacchics would speak in tongues too.
Oh
So
yeah, no, that spiritual like ecstasy and madness, like that's a really powerful ritual state. If you can get into that, like that is
yeah,
it's useful, man. Recommend,
and
recommend.
you can probably trace the Pentecostals back to the what was the name of the Nazarenes. The Nazarenes were worshipped the serpent as Christ, because when Moses holded up the serpent in the wilderness to
Yeah.
heal everybody, the same way Christ is put on the cross. So they would hold snakes. They would get into these giant. I guess some of the early Christian writers would call them orgiastic rites. They were, because they were
Yeah.
trying to make fun of them. But like this, they were
Yeah.
trying to get into the zone. They were trying to get that energy.
Yeah.
And so the Nicene preacher, I'm not. Oh, I hate when this happens. I'll fix it. I'll fix it in a second. But
You're just like a void
yeah, I'll
right now.
just go like this for now. I'll fix it in one sec.
Yeah.
But anyways, the Nicene preacher, I'm not sure if you heard of him. He was one of the early
I
Christian,
haven't.
very famous Christian in the 2nd century. So famous. Everyone knew who he was. And he took the hymn, the Orphic hymn to Attis, and he applied it to Jesus. So what he did was he crossed off the name Attis
Oh.
and put Jesus on there. So this shows us evidence that not only were Christians in the 2nd century coming out of the Judaism vein, but they're also coming out of the Platonist vein, Middle Platonists at the time.
Oh.
And he was basically saying that the Egyptians who worship Osiris, they really worship Christ. And the Phrygians that worship Attis, they really worship Christ. And the Greeks worshiping Dionysus, they really worship Christ. That was his message. His message was that Christ was the divine common denominator thread going through all of these mystery religions.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
I like that theory, actually. I could see it.
definitely. The Nicene preacher is where it's at. But anyways, next super chat is thoughts on the divine feminine.
I've talked extensively about the divine feminine. I'm a big divine feminine fan. I'm a woman, so I connect to the divine feminine, and I think it's really valuable. I think that it's an important principle to understand. Divine feminine, divine masculine, it's an important polarity, and it's one I would advise people learn about. It's a very important metaphysical concept. So I have a video on both of those ideas on my channel. So I have discussed them.
Speaking of that, the channel is linked in the title. So click on that title and go right over there and subscribe. Thanks for that super chat. I think there's a couple more. Drawing down the stars. Thanks for the super chat. Thoughts on banishing. Are you casting out spirits and protecting yourself, or forming equal relationships?
So when we talk about banishing, I'm assuming you're referring to like hermetic modern occult banishings and stuff that people typically do. A lot of those banishing rituals are a better way to explain them is what they're doing, and I'd have to go through all the formula of the entire thing, but basically you're centering yourself in your microcosm, right? You're calling through these energetic points, and then you are calling these protective spirits around you on all your sides, which will sort of banish out spirits. Now, an LBRP is not going to get rid of every spirit in the world. That's just not going to happen that way. And then you do the 4 Bounding Flames pentagram and a 6 ray star, and then that's your big like push out. And it centers you in your little space, banishes things out generally. It's not going to kick out everything. And it kind of strengthens that energetic body of light and kind of like lights it up a bit. Funnily enough, most banishing rituals call on spirits to banish. You're going to notice that a lot. A lot of banish rituals say, before me, Raphael, behind me, Gabriel, on my hand, Michael, on my left hand, Uriel, right? that's invoking to banish, right? You're invoking to kick other things out. So you're not actually fully banishing everything, right? Because you're still calling to kick out, right? And also, I mean, if you're worried about like upsetting spirits or something like that, you wouldn't let just like your friend, like, okay, let me use a metaphor. So when you're using a ritual, you are calling a spirit in to interact with them, right? Sometimes those spirits will be ones you want around you, and sometimes they're ones that you kind of want your distance from. If you had met someone for the first time, because that's what you're doing, right? You're meeting this person. Would you let them sleep on your couch after you had them over for dinner and just like live there? Probably not. You would ask them to leave. It's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Like, even if a spirit you really like, maybe you want to keep them around. Like, maybe you don't want to banish every time you call them up, though I still would. It's still good, you know, to be like, hey, I want some space, right? It's not offensive to spirits. No god is going to be offended that you, like, banished things. Like, it's fine. Do your LBRPs. It's fine. And it generally is good to cleanse and purify your space regularly, so that you don't have a bunch of like weird energies laying around shitting up your house. Well, it's like showering. It's like showering.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just never thought about that until this question popped up. It's interesting. And then he said after that, it's just a big debate among some occultists about how to approach spirits. Some say these banishing rituals are negative.
Yeah, some say that. I would not agree with that at all. In the tradition that I was exposed to and taught, that is not how we view it. We banish before and after every single ritual, every single time. If you're doing a light little prayer, maybe you don't need to do that. But for any sort of ritual, banish, go through the steps, go through the formula, banish again.
Interesting. Grand Pong says, I don't know why I would barge in and ask them to come. If they show up, I'm cool to chat. But why should I bother spirits that might not want to be bothered?
If God doesn't want to work with you or
they won't
deal
come.
with
They
you,
might.
they won't come. Yeah, they just won't show up. It's not like they don't have to. Yeah.
I have a story. I've told this on my channel
story?
before, and it was.
Wait, I want to hear it.
Taking DMT, and this was years ago. This was like 10 years ago, at least.
Yeah.
And I'm not kidding. So I was by myself, first of all, which is weird. Why was I doing DMT by myself? Who the fuck was I into that? Anyway, this is a true story. This is what happened. And so I broke through. Now, this is I don't know if this is the first time I had a breakthrough. You know, I don't know if you know what that is. It's like when you do DMT, but it's like extra powerful for no one knows why. It's not like you take more. It's the same amount that you always take. Maybe it's the headspace. No one knows. People are trying to figure this out. What makes someone break through compared to what makes someone not break through? Anyways, this was one of those times where a breakthrough is like you're not in the space that you're in. So I'm no longer in my living room. I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I was somewhere else. Everything looked different. And there was what looked like Brahma. This is before I was into any ancient religions. It was a god that looked like it had multiple heads, and the heads were turning around in a circle. He had multiple hands, like when his hands are moving, it was like a million hands, and he was floating like an Indian god would sit there with his.
I would consider that relevant. I would be like, this is some sort of sign.
Yeah, and it was a change. That actually, I'm not kidding, it changed my life. That experience. So that was one of those like crazy, mind-blowing experiences that was on DMT. That was like, remember I came down. It was only DMT is only 5 minutes long. After 5 minutes, you're back. I remember just being like, what the fuck was that? And I never, ever, ever matched that experience ever. Never again. Never. Just happened one time.
That's crazy. I've never done DMT, so
it's pretty intense.
Nice to know.
It's pretty intense.
I'm not super into psychedelics. I know a lot of people are. I know a lot of people who are.
Well, the Greeks had their kaikion.
A lot of traditions have some form of entheogens in them somewhere.
The Soma and the Indian.
It has a place.
Soma religion, Soma sacrifice, kaikion, and then obviously ayahuasca. So it's definitely a thing in the shaman religion world. But I'm also aware that you don't need that. You don't have to do that.
I think I think entheogens have a place. I think that they, they can clearly cause some really profound and useful experiences, but they're not the only way to approach it. You know what I mean? They have
Yeah,
a place, but it's not everything. That's how I
absolutely.
like to
I
discuss it.
agree. Yeah. Like someone like myself probably needs it because I'm not the type of person that's gonna like to feel the energy. Like I sort of need
Yeah.
that for me, like just for me. But some people don't need it. Some people can get into a meditative state and they can feel something. Like I need it. I'm the person I need some ayahuasca or something like to
Yeah.
get me there. You know what I mean? But that's the difference, you know.
Yeah.
So thank you for that super or question. Marcus says, I'm an ex-Christian. Now I'm in search of some belonging. Any advice on where to go from here? I want to be religious, just not Christian. I can identify with that, Marcus. Thanks for the super chat.
I would start with just exploring a bunch of different ideas and figuring out what makes sense to you, what calls to you, and what is in line with your will, right? Because when you're leaving Christianity, you're deciding this is not what I want. This is not what I believe is true. This is not my will. This is not my path. But then you have to go like, okay, what's next? And I mean, I can't tell you exactly what path is going to be your path. I can't tell you what your will is. I can just tell you to explore different ideas, look into what's out there, explore what's out there, and try praying to different things, try doing different little, religious practices and seeing what like you feel. You know what I mean? Like what do you experience that leads somewhere? That's what I would say. But
And
just
also,
like I grew up Christian. I was raised Christian. My family wasn't strict Christians or anything. Like, my family know I'm an occultist and a pagan. They're aware. And they were like chill with it. But when I left that, which was really young, I realized I wasn't a Christian like super young. I for a long time, like I was in this weird place where I was like, I definitely think some form of religion is true. Like I don't think I'm an atheist, but I don't know what is true.
sure.
And I still don't 100% think I understand everything. I don't think I ever will understand everything.
Yeah,
If
no
I
way.
did, I wouldn't be doing mysticism anymore because mysticism is the search for divinity and truth at the core of it.
Yeah.
But definitely like open your mind and just like look around. That you're clearly looking around if you're here. So just kind of keep exploring, and you probably will be in kind of like a weird liminal void spot for a while you figure things out, and you may have another change of faith at some other point in time. So just keep an open mind, I would say.
Also, Snappy, if you're in the chat still, give them the link for that Discord that you made because you might meet some people in there that will. That's a good place to start, I'd say, because Snappy's Discord has a lot of people in there from different ranges of the occult and different perspectives, and there's a lot of information there too. So definitely check that out. Thanks for that super chat.
Yeah, talking to other people can be really good. Like some of those Discords and online communities can be really helpful in like seeing the scope of what's out there.
Yeah, yeah. And start reading some primary sources, start reading some texts. You might find something in there that you like. Hammond, thanks for the super chat. What do you think of the influx of the old deities in modern pop culture, movies, TV shows, and video games, and the way they're being portrayed? For example, Hades being evil, Zeus loving Hera.
Yeah, I generally am okay with it. I think that media is not history. I think the problem is when people watch media and think that that is religious truth
Right.
and
Yeah,
base
good
their
point.
religious perceptions off of media. That is when it's a problem. As long as people are like aware, like it's fiction. Like I am not a stickler. Like I watch a lot of movies with esotericism, and I'm not a stickler for accuracy. I don't like lose my mind when something is like inaccurate because it's media. It's art. It's meant to be like entertaining and like make you feel something. It's not meant to be like a documentary. If it was a documentary, I'd be on the completely other side of the fence. But yeah, just don't think it's like like religious teachings and you're fine. I don't know. Some people get really up in arms about it. I really don't care.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's like if a media, if a movie or a music or some sort of video game is portraying Hades in a certain way, that's just them expressing their right for to do anything, like the right for creative arts, right? But the source of all this stuff, we got to go back to the text. We got to go back to the sources. We got to go back to Hesiod, Homer. That's where you got to go.
I find a lot of like occult and pagan related media like interesting and fun to watch. Like I like it.
Me too.
I don't know, but also I also don't go in expecting it to be like truth useful. Does that make any
Right.
sense? Like I go in expecting to be like entertained.
Exactly. It's like it's not scripture.
Yeah.
It's just some fun. That's all. I think I saw a good question. I can't remember what it was. Do you ever do any low magic?
Occasionally. It's not what most of what I do. Like 99% of what I do would be like high magic, almost honestly mysticism,
What's
right?
the
Like
difference?
um it's gets semanticsy after a certain point.
Sure.
But low magic, high magic, I can explain that really quickly.
Yeah.
Low magic is a term for practical results magic, a lot of the time not utilizing like spirits or complex invocations and ritual processions, right? It's like the get or done magic, the stuff that gets called spells a lot of the time, or like folk magic, that type of stuff, like the talismans, the charms, that type of stuff. And then high magic typically refers to like invoking complex spirits, evocation, ceremonial stuff. Mysticism and ceremonial stuff have a massive overlap, but it's really just kind of your orientation and how you approach it is really what it is.
Interesting.
And some mysticism is obviously kind of just performed differently, but I'm very like, oriented on ritual and trying to understand things and gnosis. That's really what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get gnosis. I'm trying to get closer to the divine. That's what my practice is oriented around. Occasionally I do stuff to like, you know what I mean, get practical results. I do that too, but it's not most of what I do, if that makes any sense.
That makes
I
a lot
think
of sense.
practical results stuff has a place, and I've done it. I've had results. I do it, but I think it's less. I don't want to say less valuable. That's a very. It's not going to change you in the same way as mysticism and that high magic, that getting close to the divine will. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does. And I was talking to someone else about this a few days ago that my favorite headspace is when it's like 2 a.m. and I'm reading some, I don't know, Hesiod or something, and I'm like going through and reading. Like I like the act of digging into ancient texts and reading, learning that process. I guess you can call it attaining gnosis if you want. But the process of actually trying to learn this stuff is
that's your
something.
gnosis. You're getting gnosis there.
Yeah, I love it. That's like the best place to be. I honestly, like, even when I was in Israel on vacation, still was pulling out my books and reading them every night and doing my thing. So
when I go on vacation, I still do rituals. I like bring a few things with me when I travel. That are like my kind of short list of ritual tools. That I like bring in my like little suitcase. Obviously, I can't bring certain things because I think that'd be a really funny TSA interaction when they're like, "Why do you have a ritual? What is this? What's this knife? What's that for?"
Yeah,
certain things are definitely not going on.
That next line over here. You're gonna.
I actually once had. Oh my god, I once actually got stopped in TSA line, because I had a candle in my carry-on bag.
Oh, wow.
So I had this like 7-day candle, like, one of the big ones, they have it like, the grocery stores and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure you guys have all seen the 7-day candles. I had it in my carry-on bag because I was only flying with a carry-on bag because I was visiting somewhere for a couple days. And they pulled it out and they like put it back on the train, like, we need to search this bag. And I was like, oh my God, what is in my bag? What's going on? And they're like, do you have a liquid in here? Like, I don't have a liquid in here. And they pulled out this candle, like, oh, the scanner thought this was a liquid.
Oh, I see.
For it. I'm like, it's a candle. It's one of those that had like, like the pictures on it, right? Like, so I was like, it's a candle. It's a candle.
Cool.
And then they gave it back to me, but I was like, oh no, what's going to happen now?
They probably thought there's something inside the wax, like you're like bringing something.
No, it was a candle. I burnt it when I was there. It was a candle.
Interesting. That's funny. Sharon Rose has a good question. What does it mean to be initiated without seeking?
You have to seek to know what to get initiated into, right?
Yeah.
Why would you initiate into something if you aren't at least like seeking towards it? I mean, you can get initiated into something and realize you don't want to go further, but you kind of need to. I mean, I don't know who would just initiate into something that they're not like, they haven't like thought about. I mean, I guess some people probably do, but you should definitely be sure of what you're doing before you get initiated. The first step is typically not like initiating into a formal tradition for most people. That's not like step one. It sounds like it might be step one, but it's typically not.
I see what you mean. Yeah. That's why I thought that was an interesting question. But yeah, that was a good answer. Let's see. Being a Witch is back with another question. Are psychedelics good for magic ceremonies?
Psychedelics have a place, but most ritual ceremonies do not involve psychedelics.
Optional, right?
well, even a lot of them, like some of them, like if you go to like a big group, like and you just start like tripping, I don't think they'd like that. Honestly, I think you
Yeah,
might
that's true.
leave.
You might want to chill out on that. Yeah, I get
Yeah,
that.
maybe
It
don't
makes
like
sense.
go up to like some like, especially if you show up to some like sweet like Wiccan ceremony ran by like old ladies. You know what I mean? It's like some sweet like boomer Wiccans.
Yeah,
Maybe
yeah. You
like
want to keep that private and you do that in your own time.
if you're doing psychedelics in a ritual space setting, that happens, but like that's not most group rituals, and you should definitely tell someone.
Right.
Please do not just start tripping during someone's ritual.
Yeah, don't just start freaking everybody out.
Yeah, you might get some interesting reactions for that.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on with that guy over there?
Yeah, what's up with this dude? He's acting crazy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think if I think there might be a couple more. Here we go. Thanks, Nichols, for the question. Is there specific music that's a good representation of your drug experience? Oh, this is for me.
Yeah, I think that's for you because I'm not really a psychedelic person.
I actually have a good answer for this. None. Quietness. It was when I like for just for me. Like some people might like the sound of a flute or whatever, or like the pounding of a drum. I don't know. But when my experiences with DMT was the best was when it was completely silent, when you couldn't hear a pin drop. Can't explain why. I'd done it so many times that I would try different things. I would try putting on some like, I don't know, let's try some ancient music. Let's try this, try that. Let's try putting on some trippy stuff on the TV. No, I just like complete silence, and I like to close my eyes. I didn't have my eyes open. I closed them. So I'm just giving you my own experience. That was the best time. So that's that. Thanks for that question though. That might be it, but let me just see. Yeah. Oh, here we go. It's your boy AK. Thanks for the super chat. Do you have some rules for sexual desires, like no sex or masturbation during ceremonies times, like 40 days as Hinduism rituals?
It depends on what you're doing. Really depends on what you're doing. Different rituals have different guidelines, so depends. Also, different traditions have very different views on sex.
Yeah.
Like what you're doing is going to really vary that. I think almost every tradition agrees that there is a spiritual and metaphysical dimension to sex. I think that's a universal belief. That's also pretty clearly true. But the thing is how it should be done or how often or if it's good or that's a whole different conversation. So I give that a depends.
Yeah, exactly. Here we go. Pseudocellus. Have you ever performed a theurgic ritual? Example, amicus.
A lot of what I do could be called theurgy.
Sure.
It's not like the word I like jump for, but it's pretty accurately would describe a lot of what I do. A lot of rituals are theurgy if you're really going to do it.
Yeah, that makes sense because that's what theurgy basically is that ritual of performing a rite. I mean, it's kind of a broad definition.
Theurgy is a very broad concept, actually.
Yeah,
it's my hot take on theurgy.
Yeah, and that pretty much explains that answers that question.
Maybe I'll do a video on theurgy at some point. That'd probably be something people would like. I could do that.
Oh yeah, for sure. I would like to see that too. Last question for the night. Apopheniac. Is magic like metaphorical truth?
So magic as a term is a term for using will to make change. That is how magic is defined. So I don't think that is a term for metaphorical truth. So yeah, magic is using will to make change.
What do you think about people who?
Quick definition.
I've heard people say this before. Like they'll say like technology and the use of electric power to like power a TV is some sort of so it's basically magic in modern times. What do you think about that concept?
I mean, I guess kind of if you think about it, because it is using like energy to make change by lighting things. So I guess kind of. I think there's been a movement of people who are like really trying to integrate technology with magic, and like find esoteric stuff in tech. It's not really my thing. I like when I do my rituals, I have like phones off. I basically have like lights off half the time. I like no tech around me when I'm doing stuff. But there are people who do like techno magic. It's a thing. I don't know a ton about it because it's not really something that I deal with, but yeah, it's a thing. But I mean, I guess kind of if you want to get like technically if you use the definition of will to make change, is magic. A lot of things can be classified as magic that you wouldn't think, but
Yeah. Good point. And that's it for now. I had fun with this conversation. Anything else you wanted to say while we're here, or anything promote? What's your next video you got coming up?
My next video is coming out tomorrow at noon. So
Nice.
my next video is on planetary magic. It's a 101 video. I post every week on YouTube. I alternate between YouTube videos and my podcast every week Wednesday, always at noon. My podcast, I have guests on, and we we discuss more specific topics and sometimes broad cultural stuff. My videos, they're all about like occultism, paganism, magic. A lot of it is introductory stuff. So if you are completely unaware of the occult and this introduces you to a bunch of concepts you've never heard of, go to my channel. I have a playlist called Occult 101 that is all my beginner videos. I've made a ton of them. It's a series I've been running for like 3 years. So
here it is.
That Occult 101 playlist. Yeah, 28 videos. That's the one.
Nice. Good thumbnail too.
On like every platform. I don't know where I'm not on the internet. I'm literally everywhere. I do a podcast. I'm on Substack. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Telegram, Patreon. I'm everywhere. I don't know where. If you can name a platform, I'm probably on it. Just search up Doc Darling and you'll find me.
Yeah, that's how my name is now too. If you type in Gnostic Informant, you're gonna find it. Yeah, that's great. And I'll definitely be looking forward to the video tomorrow. And thanks for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me on. This was a really fun conversation.
We'll do it again in a couple months.
Yeah, hit me up and we'll make it happen.
Awesome. And you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over